A long time ago, I made a video talking about the fact that I identify as aside, which means that I am a gay man who doesn't enjoy anal sex. And ever since I made that video, I get messages literally every single day from people asking questions because they're curious and it's not something that they've heard about before. But also I get messages from so many gay men saying that they feel exactly the same way and that they didn't know that it was a thing. And so many guys out there who think that they might feel the same, but they're not sure. So today I really wanted to make a video answering some of the most commonly asked questions that I get about being aside, in the hope that it will maybe help educate some people, but also hope show that there's nothing wrong with being aside and that it's not something you should be ashamed of, and it's absolutely something that you should be proud of. So the first question is, what does it really mean to be aside? So I really can't speak for everybody, but for me personally, I just really am not interested in anal sex. I never have been interested in it. I'm not repulsed by it or anything like that. It just isn't for me. Growing up, I never wanted to try it. I just kind of thought that I had to because that's what society was telling me to do. I never looked at a guy and was like, oh my god, I want to fuck him or I want to get fucked by him. It never interested me. I was always very much interested in like wanking guys off and like having oral sex and all of these other things, but anal sex just never was on my radar as a thing. It just never appealed to me. Does being aside make you asexual? Now, this is a question that I get all the time, and honestly I find it difficult not to be offended by this question. Not that there's anything wrong with being asexual, there isn't. Being asexual is great and it's perfectly fine, but I'm not asexual. In fact, I feel like I'm a very sexual person. It's just that I don't enjoy anal sex, and there can be this kind of connection that anal sex is real sex and that's the only sex that is valid. So when people hear that, oh, you don't like having anal sex, that they presume that you're asexual. But that's not what asexuality is. Being asexual means that you don't kind of experience or feel any kind of sexual desire, which I absolutely do. So no, I'm not asexual just because I'm aside. So do you never ever have real sex? This is another one that I get all the time. And again, it's this idea that the only real sex, the only valid sex is anal sex. And honestly, I think that is kind of almost heteronormative. It's this idea that there has to be penetration involved for it to count, which, I really don't agree with that. I think I've had incredibly intimate, amazing experiences with guys where there has been no penetration involved, and I absolutely count that as valid, real sex. I've also, in the days when I was still having anal sex, I had anal sex that I really didn't feel was very intimate, and I didn't really feel very connected to the person. Just because penetration was involved, I don't think it made it any less or more real. And it can be quite hurtful to me personally when people say, oh, you didn't have sex then because there was no penetration, or oh, you're not having real sex. It can be quite hurtful because it's almost like invalidating my experiences. So try to reassess the way you think about it and the way you talk about it, because those kind of things, if you say them to the wrong person, you could really, really hurt their feelings. What if you fell in love with a guy who wanted anal sex? Now, this is a tricky question, and again, I can only really answer this for myself. So for me personally, I really don't enjoy anal sex. I don't like the idea of it. But if I was in love with somebody and they really, really wanted to top or bottom and they felt like they needed it, I do feel like we could come to some kind of compromise. And I do think that, I would maybe do it with them sometimes. I used to be in a 6-year relationship and we were having anal sex pretty much every day. So it's not like it's not something I've never done. It's just something that doesn't particularly appeal to me. But if I was in love with somebody, now and then, I'm not saying I would do it all the time because I absolutely wouldn't, but now and then I would potentially be open to it. Have you ever topped or bottomed? This is honestly probably the most common question I get. When people hear that I'm aside and that I'm not into anal sex, they assume that I've never had it and they assume I know nothing about it. Whereas actually I was having anal sex for 7 years before I kind of realised and accepted that I was aside, and I've not really had anal sex since then. But yeah, I've topped and I've bottomed quite a lot of times. Bottoming I can just about get on board with, but topping I really, really struggle with because the idea of it turns me off so much that I lose my erection quite quickly, which makes it difficult. So, if I really did fall in love with a guy who was a bottom and needed me to top them, I would absolutely try it as a compromise, but I don't know if I'd physically be able to. So this next question is from somebody who thinks that they're aside, but they're not really sure. And they've said, do I have to try anal sex. And I'm kind of in two minds about this because, you know, I think for me that I kind of had to try it to kind of realize that no, this is absolutely definitely not for me. I think I would always have that, you know, slight curiosity, like, oh, maybe I'll enjoy it if I try it. So for me, it very much helped me to realize that. But if you are confident, if you are certain that you really, really don't want to do anal sex, then no, you don't have to try it. Of course you don't. You don't have to try anything that you don't want to. And, you know, a very, very, very close friend of mine is also aside, and he has never, ever bottomed, and he's confident that he never wants to. And honestly, I think that's fine. You don't have to try anything that you don't want to. Are you sure you don't like anal? Maybe you've just not had good anal sex yet. This one drives me mad. It's the assumption that because I'm saying that I don't like anal sex, it must be because I've had really terrible anal. Actually, no, I've actually had really, really good anal sex. You know, my body is still capable of experiencing pleasure there. And I have been fucked where I've literally screamed the house down. That's how good it felt. But I still don't enjoy it. And I know that might be difficult to understand. And I guess the analogy that I always give is that if a woman, for instance, was to give me a blowjob, it would still feel good. I would still have the same sensations. I'd still have the same pleasure as a guy giving me a blowjob, but I wouldn't enjoy it. Just because something feels good, it doesn't necessarily make it enjoyable, and that's how I feel about anal sex. So I have had good anal sex. I really, really have, and now I still know that I don't want to have it, and that just makes me more confident and more certain in the fact that I am aside. Another question quite similar to the last one is, are you just afraid of the pain? Again, there's an assumption that because I don't like anal sex, there must be some underlying reason for that. Actually, the first time I ever had anal sex, when I lost my anal virginity, we took it really, really slow, and it didn't actually hurt at all. And I think that's a really important message to get out there, that anal sex doesn't have to hurt. I have also had anal sex that has been incredibly painful. I've kind of experienced both worlds of it. And honestly, the pain isn't really anything to do with why I do or don't like it. I just genuinely don't like it. If there was no pain involved, that would not change anything. So what do you do if you don't do anal? This again is a question that I get all the time, and I try not to get frustrated about it, but it's really, really difficult sometimes. You know, there's this assumption that my sex life must be really, really boring just because I'm not having anal sex. And honestly, I think it says more about the person asking that question if they can't think of anything to do in the bedroom aside from anal sex. There are so many different things you can do. Obviously, there's the obvious things like hand jobs, oral sex, etc. But then you can, you know, venture into the world of BDSM and role play and all these different kinks. There are so many things that two people can do together with their clothes off, or even with their clothes on. You know, there are things you can do there too. So honestly, it's just, there are thousands of things you can do, and you just gotta use your imagination. I've never felt like I'm having boring sex. I enjoy all the sex that I have, and I never feel like I'm missing out just because I'm not having penetrative sex. The next one is, when did you realise you were aside? So for me, I was 23 years old, so 5 years ago, and I was living in London, and I was having sex with guys, and I was still trying to have anal sex at this time, and I was still, you know, really not getting on with it and really not enjoying it. But again, I thought that that was what I had to do. And then it was actually an article in Attitude magazine where I first heard the term for the first time. It was the first time I saw somebody writing about being aside. Before then, I always thought there was something wrong with me. I knew I didn't like anal sex, and I thought there was something wrong with me because of it. And then for the first time, I was like, oh no, this is a perfectly valid thing, and like, this is how I feel. And you know, people have messaged me since watching my video on it, being like, oh my god, I didn't know this was a thing, I feel exactly the same as you. So once I read that article, I started kind of dipping my toe in the water by talking to a few of my close friends and saying, hey, I think I feel this way, I think I might be aside, I've never been into anal sex, and I think this is how I feel. And just doing that, I had other people go, wait, hang on a minute, I feel that way too. And the more I've talked about this, the more I've realised that there are so many other guys out there who feel the same way as I do. There was even this one guy I'd been dating, and we had been trying to have anal sex together, again, because we thought that was what we were supposed to do. And then when I guess came out as a side, he turned around and was like, oh my god, I feel the same. And the two of us were like trying to have anal sex that we didn't want because we were too ashamed to admit that we didn't like anal sex. So honestly, I think it's really, really common. And since I've started talking about it, I'd honestly say that probably about a quarter of the gay men I know also feel exactly the same way. So please do not feel like you're alone in this. There are so many people who feel exactly the same as you. Have you ever been rejected because of being a side? So I think in the 5 years that I have identified as a side and not been having anal sex, there have literally been only 2 instances of guys who didn't want to get with me because I didn't want anal sex. So one of them, I was at a music festival and I met this guy and we were dancing away to Years and Years. It was an amazing experience. I absolutely loved it. And we started kissing. One thing led to another. And then he asked me outright, he was like, "Oh, you're a top, right?" And I was like, "Oh, actually, no, I don't really do anal." And he was very honest and upfront about it. And he was like, his actual words were, "I'm really sorry, but I need a dick in my ass." And honestly, all power to him for knowing what he wants. And I wasn't offended. I was a little bit disappointed because he was beautiful and I really wanted to get with this guy. But, you know, he acknowledged that we weren't sexually compatible and he was really respectful about it. And yeah, so that was one instance. And then the other one was not that long ago, and it was actually a top I was talking to. And again, he brought up something about anal sex, and I just said, "Oh, you know, I'm not really into that." And he was like, "Oh, sorry, like I really want to fuck somebody. If you're not into that, that's not for me." And again, like, all power to him for being honest and open about that. And I wasn't really offended, you know, that's absolutely fine. But that was only twice in 5 years of me being a side. So, you know, I don't feel like it inhibits my sex life at all. Do you think you'll always be a side, or could it just be a phase? I am pretty certain that it's not a phase. I'm pretty sure, you know, like my whole life since I started having like sexual feelings and things like that, it never really appealed to me at all. And at 28 years old, it still doesn't appeal to me now. I've tried it and I don't want to have it. So I don't think that this is going to change, but I'm not ruling it out. I would never like hold myself back. If I woke up one day being like, "Oh my God, I really want to have anal sex," I wouldn't stop myself from doing it just because I'd said that I was a side. But I don't think it's going to happen. I really feel like this is how I feel and how I am, and I don't think it's going to change. Like a lot of my sex education content, this video has been sponsored by the lovely people at Love Honey, and as always, they're letting me give you guys a discount on one of their toys. So this is the Mantric rechargeable vibrating head masturbator, and basically you put the head of your penis inside here and then switch it on, and it has all loads of different settings and speeds. And basically you just play around with that. Earlier in the video, people were asking, what do you do sexually if you don't have anal sex? And often sex toys are a great way to mix things up. So yeah, if you do want to get your hands on one of these, then there is a 20% discount on this, and there'll be a link down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you did enjoy this video, please make sure you do give it a like and a comment down below. Subscribe for more sex education content, and I'll see you all very, very soon. See ya!